Thank you very much. It's funny, I'm here and the people in the audience are the ones that I want to hear. So I don't know why I'm up here and you're down there, but let me share with you just a few things. So my name is Christopher Hull. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Center for Security Policy, and I am built by God to fight the left. So let me describe for you a particular problem that I think is very important for us to explore because it's our future. What I'm going to show you is a glimpse of what will happen to America if we fail. And I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that interrelate. It's a story about Islam and a story about cultural Marxism. I think everybody is very familiar with these sort of two threats. And then I'm going to tell you a third story, which is how they intersect. To be academically accurate, if I'm asking the question, who is breaking Europe, I have to include Russia. And I know I sound like a congressional Democrat, right? Because I can't say anything without saying, Russia, 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 what's going on? Russia, it's Russia. But the truth is that some of the cleavages that are being created in European society and in American society are being exacerbated by Russia. I'll give you a couple of examples, and I'm going to close with a call for us not to let these people win, especially here, because you'll see it will not be pretty no matter which of them actually prevails once they've destroyed us. So the first thing that I wanted to describe to you, the first story I want to give you is about Hijrah. Who's familiar with the term Hijrah? Have you ever heard this term before? Okay, we do have a few people. So Hijrah is migration in the way of Allah. This is weaponized immigration. It is the process by which Islam spreads geographically. And technically speaking, Hijrah is a reference to 622 AD, which was the year that Muhammad fled from Mecca to Medina. He did that because the small group of Muslims around him were being oppressed. And he was trying to find a place where he could operate more securely, in a place where he could spread his faith, which he did. He found Medina, a place that he renamed Medina, which he then took over and ended up slaughtering virtually everyone who had lived there before, including beheading 600 Jews with his own hands when he ultimately caught up with them. Personally. So, this term, you'll see, and I think you can imagine why this term is important right now, but the expression in Islam is iman, hijrah, jihad. That is faith, immigration, and then war. Holy war. That is the progression that we're in the middle of right now in the United States and further along in Europe. It's called the Refugee Crisis, or migrant crisis. And these are weaponized terms. These are terms that are developed by the radical left, which have been adopted and are spit back at us. This is the most palatable possible way to describe what is going on in Europe. Because refugees, we like refugees, right? This is Soviet refugees and refugees from war. We like refugees. The only problem is, it's a lie. The people who are showing up in Europe are technically not refugees because under international law, a refugee is somebody who crosses one border from a conflict and is welcomed in the next safe country. That's the legal definition of a refugee. These people are doing one of two things. Most of them are economic migrants. They saw an opportunity and they took it. They're trying to get a better life for their families, and God bless them. The others are waging jihad. They're waging jihad through immigration, which is Hijrah. They are entering our society in order to destroy it for themselves. So this is the number of asylum seekers up to 2015, and you can see a little problem there, right? The number of asylum seekers in 2015 surged. Why did it surge? It surged because of Angela Merkel, whose government said, oh, yeah, we'll take basically anybody who shows up. We could probably only take 1 million a year. Well, that, of course, caused a massive surge of people saying they were Syrian. They weren't Syrian. Most of these people weren't Syrian, but a lot of people showed up saying, I'm a Syrian, you have to let me in, and they did. The origins, these are lies, right? This is not the truth. Because these are the 3 war-torn areas that if you said, I'm from these places, therefore you could get in, especially Syria. But a lot of them were Syrians. There were, not as many as this chart reflects. Not as many as this chart reflects from Afghanistan, not as many as this chart reflects from Iraq, but just clearly some of the people were actually fleeing these conflicts. That is a thing. It happened. It's true. So, if that's true, to the extent that it's true, let's look at the beliefs of these people. So in Iraq right now, and the Syrian refugees that were polled, by the way, these are all reputable polls, none of the deplorable polls that my organization conducts. Deplorable only because they find things that people don't like. There is a relatively small number of people who say that they are supportive or are neutral to Islamic State. Now, 2 problems with this. Number 1, let me give you a quiz. If you are a member of the mafia, La Cosa Nostra, and the phone rings, and somebody asks you, do you support the mafia? What do you say? No! You say no! It is not hard to figure out. You say no! So if somebody calls you and says, hey, do you support beheading people in public? And you say yes, you're a problem. I don't want you in my country, right? Now, that's one problem here. These people are actively saying, yes, I actually support Islamic State. And the second problem is, we just looked at this chart. This is in thousands, 350,000 who at least said they were from Syria. And by the way, this is a survey of Syrian refugees. So many of them are liars. It doesn't matter how many are liars. They actually surveyed the refugees, right? So if the number is 13%, 23%, whatever it is, if it's, say it's only 10%, 10% of 350,000 is 35,000 people. 35,000 people who are supporters of Islamic State that were let in just in 2015 into Europe. That's a problem. Now, I want to grant you something. Look at Palestine. Palestine, there never was a country Palestine. There never was a country Palestine. So these are Palestinians, meaning that they are former Jordanians, former Syrians, right? Former Egyptians who are in the area that is now called Israel and the occupied territories around it. Well, granted, there are higher levels of Islamic State support in some places, right? That's a problem that the Israelis have to deal with every single day. But look at this. Support for Sharia in the countries that these people are coming from, that the refugees, vaunted refugees, women and children, 2-year-olds lying face down on the beach, right? Oh, it's heartbreaking. The support for Sharia law, the most brutal system of law on the face of the planet, which is saying something. That's really saying something, given that we have, North Korea, we have the Soviet Union. If this system of law is actually fully implemented, there are steps beyond what Islamic State has done. It gets worse from there. Support for that is 91% in Iraq. And these have migrated, these circles have migrated. But Afghanistan, if you look above the top circle, Afghanistan, it's 99%. 99% support for the most brutal system of law that mankind has ever really concocted. That's not something that you want to bring into your country. And by the way, I want to grant a point that was just made. George Soros' goal is not to impose Sharia law. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. But I strongly agree, and I will get to this point, that the left is bringing these people in on purpose. They're doing it on purpose. So, now here's the result, right? Shocker, EU deaths from terrorist attacks have spiked like crazy. It is huge. And by the way, the EU claims that from 2007 to 2014, the number of terrorist attacks in the EU has gone down. The chart is the opposite of this. It comes down like this. And the way that they do that is by including in the definition of terrorist attack things that are not intended to terrify. They're like people in Corsica who are vandalizing French cafes because they want to take Corsica back, and they also kind of like it when they don't have competition from the French when they're setting up cafes on the beach, right? That's terrorism in the EU definition. So they are defining it in order to avoid the problem that they're seeing. But it's real, and people are dying because of it. There is, as a result, in Europe today, plurality support in every major country for a real Muslim ban. Now, Donald Trump called for an actual Muslim ban during the campaign, and what he implemented was not at all a Muslim ban. In fact, my organization opposed, during the campaign, told his people, don't do this. Do not use a geographic ban. You will paint with too broad a brush, and you will be tarred and feathered. And they went down the road because people were advising them, well, we can't screen for Sharia because that would be mean. No, you can't screen for people who want to kill you. Instead, you have to just use broad geographic areas. Well, that was a disaster, which continues to unfold. It's a stupid mistake, frankly, that's being pushed not by him, but by others in his administration I won't name. The lowest level of support now in a major country is in Spain, which hasn't had the level of migration. And it's over 40% for an actual Muslim ban, because they see what's happening. It's terrible, right? And their countries are stopping them. Their countries are shutting them down. That is where I'm going to go next. Just in case you're wondering, Brexit was actually a vote on immigration. You don't have a major party right now in England that acknowledges the problem of Hijrah. None of them. UKIP is refusing to explicitly acknowledge that Hijrah is a problem, that the problem of jihad by migration exists. They only talk about immigration in the context of economic migrants from Eastern Europe. Why? Because we'll get to that. But take it from a leftist academic who did the study. Notice the word right in the middle, prejudice. That's how the academic defined, I'm worried about the fact that we're taking people who want to murder us into our country. That's prejudice, right? So if you've had positive contact with immigrants, that tends to decrease your support, decrease your prejudice, that is, your concern that you're being invaded. It also decreased the likelihood that you would vote for Brexit. If you have had negative contacts with immigrants in the UK, that increases your prejudice, your concern about immigration, and it drove your voting intention. This is with everything else controlled for. Your party registration, everything. What was really driving the vote was, are you concerned about Hijrah? Are you concerned about the Islamic invasion which is taking place of your nation? That's what caused Brexit. Alternative for Deutschland, same thing. What do they say? We know what the left says about Alternative for Deutschland. They're Nazis. They're neo-Nazis. They're far right. They're radicals. They're, anti-Semitic. They're racist. They're Jew haters. They're all these horrible things. What do they say? Quote, we don't like Islamic invasion. That's what they say. And of course, that's hate speech. You want to know what I hate? I hate watching little girls cry over the caskets of daddies they'll never see again because of limp-wristed leftists calling people haters. That's what I hate. And I'm sick of it. I'm sick of watching the predictions of what was going to happen in New York that started with Pam Geller before de Blasio was elected, saying this policy will cause terror strikes in New York once it takes hold. 4 years ago, she said that. Before he was elected, 2 years ago, a scholar wrote a piece saying we are at increased risk of terror strikes in New York because of these 7 policy things that Bill de Blasio is doing. He is increasing over time the likelihood that people are going to die. We knew it. We said it. The Chelsea bombings happened. He refused to acknowledge it was terrorism. And bingo bango, here are 8 dead people whose families will never see their loved one alive again. And we knew it. We knew it was going to happen. Well, he doesn't like that. Alternative for Deutschland didn't like that. And that's why they're now the 3rd largest party in Germany. It's the most seats a party this far right has won since 1950. Why? Islamic invasion. Conservative parties just won in Austria. And this isn't how it's being reported, right? It's being reported, oh, surge in the far right, but they fell short. This horrible Freedom Party headed by Hofer, an economist, this radical neo-Nazi economist? No, the Freedom Party is concerned about Islamic invasion. They're concerned about what's taking place because it's cultural suicide, and they know it. And the Austrians know it, and that's why 60% of the vote went to either the Freedom Party or to the mainstream conservative party, which moved right in Austria in order to take advantage of the concern over immigration. That is the 31-year-old likely prime minister of Austria. Why? Because of Islamic invasion. But here's the second problem. And this gets to the point. I'm doing this in reverse. I'm making the same point in reverse. None of anything that I said would be a problem. None of any of that would be a problem if it weren't for the cultural Marxists, if it weren't for the left, the hard left. We need to take responsibility for this, as Ambassador Keyes told us the first night. We need to take responsibility for us. This is our fight to stop them as Christians, as members of the West. This is our fight. But we have to realize we are not just fighting Hijrah. We're fighting cultural Marxists too. It was Merkel who caused the surge in immigration. It wasn't the Syrian war that did that. The surge in migration is a result of what Merkel did. And let me walk you through why. I think everyone in this room knows this, but I am a recovering academic. I have a Ph.D. I have to teach you, even if you already know it better than me. So, I want credit for not going back to Plato. So, this actually starts, thank you, okay, this actually starts with what Socrates said in Plato's Republic, as reported by Plato. He called for property to be held in common. He called for the government control of the means of communication, for artists and for poets to be controlled by the state. All those things were present in Plato's Republic. It's present in Hegel. Hegel's the one who came up with the idea that ultimately the state was going to take power over God, that the nation state, actually, believe it or not, right? The nation state, that same term, was going to be the apotheosis of man, that the organization was going to surpass God. It was Marx who, we all know, he called for the government control of the means of production. Did you know that he called for government control of the means of communication? He did. Marx called for the abolition of religion. Quote, the abolition of religion. So this goes back a long way. These guys have been at work for thousands of years. This is not going to go away. It is evil. And it is in the fall. We have it from the fall. But have you ever heard of Mr. Dr. Kallen? In 1915, he wrote a book in which he talked about cultural pluralism. By the way, this man is brilliant. Brilliant. His writing is beautiful. It is genius. He is a really smart guy. And he was observing that, we're evolving into a different kind of country. It used to be that we were a country of a melting pot. We were a melting pot, but we're really more of a tossed salad now, right? He originated the idea, which is now called multiculturalism. It was a well-accepted concept at the time. In 1915, people were like, that's a good point. And his argument was, we need more of this. Instead of breaking down people's cultural barriers between each other when they come to the country, instead of assimilating people, let's allow them, let's encourage them to build their own culture and build little pockets of resistance to capitalism, to Christianity, to whatever else it was that America was trying to impose. Ideas of freedom. Well, there were those at the time, soon thereafter, who were saying it more explicitly. So Georg Lukács was saying explicitly who the question really in World War II. This is in 1922 or 23 he said this. In World War I, the question was not which of these folks was going to win, because he was like, I didn't mind if the Austro-Hungarian Empire was destroyed. I didn't mind if France was destroyed. I didn't mind if any of these governments was destroyed. My question, Lukács said, quote, who was to save us from Western civilization? That was his objective. As a Marxist and as a thinker, and ultimately as a government official in the short-lived Marxist Republic in Hungary, his goal was the destruction of Western civilization. And I am told, though I can't yet prove it, that the way that he went about the destruction of Western civilization, was radical sex education in the schools. That was his idea. As the head of the Ministry of Information and Culture in this short-lived Soviet Republic, all of his focus was on breaking down children's inhibitions about sex. Because he knew that Christianity and Western civilization couldn't survive if he broke the young people. They know it today, too. You've heard this one, I'm sure. Antonio Gramsci sat in a prison in Italy for his entire life, starting in the 20s. And he wrote and wrote and wrote. Another genius. Another brilliant man who writes beautifully, beautifully. And he conceptualized what was wrong with Marxism. Why is it that when we had World War II, why is it that all these societies didn't collapse? Marx predicted that they would collapse. What happened? What went wrong? What went wrong is that the instruments of consciousness are all controlled by the system. That is, the churches are teaching Christianity. Dear God, save us. We can't take power unless we take over the churches. The schools are teaching Western civilization. We can't take power as long as everybody is educated in Western civilization. The unions are actually organizing for the benefit of the workers. We can't take power as long as we don't control the unions. It was Gramsci's ideas which were later adapted into what we hear of as the march through the institutions. We need to take control of the instrument of consciousness, or else Marxism will never work. Marcuse, and this is the end of my quick tour of Marxist thought. Herbert Marcuse, another genius. Unless you read these guys, you can't appreciate how brilliant they were, how visionary they were, how incredibly smart and talented these people were. Herbert Marcuse is, I'll tell you one thing he wrote. 1965, he wrote the essay Repressive Tolerance. Google it. It comes right up on every Marxist website. If you read it, it only takes you about 20 minutes. That is the origin of political correctness. If you want to hear the theoretical foundation of political correctness, read Repressive Tolerance. And he says, using the words, we need to shut down the speech of the right, capitalized. Shut down the speech of the right and tolerate only the speech of the left, capital L. That's what he wanted to do. That is the objective of what we call political correctness. Who knows the origin of the term politically correct? I didn't either. I'm about to tell you the origin of the term. In the 1930s, it was a joke among Marxists. It's not what you think. The opposite of politically correct is not politically incorrect. Let me tell you the joke. Comrade, what you've just said is factually incorrect. Ah, comrade, I know, but it is politically correct. The opposite of what is politically correct is not politically incorrect. It is factually correct. The point of political correctness is that it conforms with the party's idea of its objectives, not with truth, right? This is the implementation of that concept. 1965, worth reading. Well, then there's this guy. I just fast-forwarded 50 years. During that 50 years, all you saw was the successful implementation of this evolved thought through Saul Alinsky, through Althusser, a French philosopher who actually laid out systematically what the instruments of consciousness were, didn't just make reference to them and give examples, but said, here are the 8 pillars of Western civilization. These are the things we need to destroy, capture or destroy. Here they are, and they're the things that you know that they took over. Arts, entertainment, media. He even mentioned, we know church, we know government, we know, right? So that 95% of the dollars that were given in the 2016 campaign from State Department employees went to Hillary Clinton. The figure in the Treasury is 99%. 99%. So while we think that we won the election, then of course the establishment took over the political appointees. Well, 100 times as many people, 100 times as many people are civil servants who over the last 100 years have been taken over by the hard left. They're all hard left. George Soros is merely the richest and most powerful individual implementing a 2 millennia old idea. And he's doing it with extraordinary effectiveness, and he is beating us. This is our fight, right? George Soros is funding mass migration. You've heard this. Well, here's a quote from him. Here's a quote from him. He's saying, well, realistically, it will be difficult for Europe to absorb more than 1 million immigrants. His view, this is a quote from him. Officials have not recognized the full cost of dealing with the migration issue, this crisis. They have a blind spot. We estimate that the cost exceeds 10 billion euros a year, that they are nowhere near this figure officially. And one of the reasons why they don't recognize this is because they don't know where they would find the money. He said the EU is on the verge of collapse. Now, this is during the crisis. The crisis is ending. This current crisis is ending. The EU is on the verge of collapse. And yet it was he who was funding the mass migration. It is he who is trying to break down the borders. It is he and his organizations that are trying to create this, to maximize the surge. He's trying to collapse Europe on his own terms, by his own words. That's his objective. The very survival of the EU is at risk. Yes, because you're trying to destroy it successfully. Now I'm going to tell you my own insider story that I saw. Has anybody here ever heard of oh dear? It's pronounced oh dear. I know you have. I know where you heard it too. It's pronounced oh dear, which I think is just hilarious. Oh dear. What are those things on that tree? Eyes. Those are all-seeing eyes. Oh dear was formed in, I believe, the year 1999 or 2000 as an election monitor. That's all it was. It was the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. It was set up as an election monitor. What is it now? Thought police. It is Europe's thought police. These people's entire job is to watch for hate crimes and hate speech, and now hate incidents. What is a hate incident, you may ask? It is hate crimes plus hate speech plus anything else that they can't throw into any other category. It's just anything that makes anybody who is in a protected class unhappy. Anything at all. And they want to show huge surges of these things so that they can shut down your speech. We are a member. The United States is a member. We fund 13% of OSCE. We are a member of this organization, and its objective is to shut down free speech. That is what it wants. I'll get to the Russians. I was at a conference within the last 6 months, 3 months, within the last 3 months that oh dear put on. At that conference, we had our speech shut down on 3 levels. First of all, at the conference, every time we spoke, we were allowed to speak, thank God. Every time we spoke, and I was with a delegation of counter-jihad free speech activists, every time we spoke, we got a slap on the wrist from the person who was chairing the meeting, saying, I'd like to remind all participants to abide by the consensus that we have reached with respect to tolerance and non-discrimination. Right? Every time we spoke. But in addition to that, they, of course, were talking about shutting down speech throughout the OSCE region, the 57 countries, including ours. So they're talking about hate speech. They're talking about what laws you can enact to shut down speech, how we can police what's going on. And in the actual conversations with them, 3 different times, I was speaking with an ODIHR staffer, and in the middle of a sentence, they cut me off and said, oh, no, we don't need to continue this conversation. I don't need to hear any more about your Islamophobia. I don't want to hear any more of your hate speech. And I'm an academic. I was telling them about I was going to show somebody, here's how the terror strikes have increased, right? This is a problem. I'm a security expert. This is a problem. No, I don't want to see that. One of them told us, Claire Lopez, my colleague, was trying to tell him, here's the concern about what's going to happen, what's happening in Europe and what's going to happen. He said, you know what, I don't want to hear this. She said, I don't want to hear your views. She said, it's not my views, it's the truth. He said, it's your truth. It's your truth, it's not my truth. And she said, but there is only one truth. Nope, don't want to hear it. So they were shutting our speech down on all these levels. And by the way, if you don't think it's actually already happened in Europe, let me tell you about Michael Stutzenberger. Michael Stutzenberger was just convicted. He was convicted of hate speech in Germany, was sentenced to 6 months in prison. They suspended it, but he can't work because he posted a photograph, a historical photograph of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem meeting a Nazi official. By the way, there are pictures of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem during World War II meeting with Hitler, right? This guy was an actual Nazi, and he said so over and over and over and over and over again, and there was an actual cadre of Muslims who fought for the Nazis. They had Nazi officials bowing to Mecca with this group of jihadis who were also Nazis, right? He posted a historical photograph and said, here is some evidence that there is an overlap between the views of Islam and the views of National Socialism. And they sentenced him to prison. I was at this organization's meeting with a woman who's from Austria, whose name is Elizabeth Sabatich-Wolf. Elizabeth Sabatich-Wolf has been convicted of blasphemy. There's a blasphemy law still on the books in Austria, which comes out of the Reformation. It's about the Reformation. It's the conflict between Protestantism and Catholicism yielded blasphemy laws, and they convicted her of it. What did she say? She said that Muhammad, because he had married a 6-year-old and consummated the relationship at 9, which would make him a pedophile, was, and I quote, a pedophile. That's true. It's a statement of objective fact. And she was convicted of blasphemy against Islam in Austria. They didn't even have to modify the law. They just convicted her of actual blasphemy. So this is happening. They are putting people in jail. They passed a law in Germany that will fine Facebook and other social media tens of millions of dollars for every instance of somebody expressing concern about Hijrah. Every instance, which means Mark Zuckerberg, who is a leftist and agrees with Soros, now has a financial incentive not to allow any of this speech to take place. That's happening now. It's happening now. Now, having said all of that, it's true that the Russians are exploiting this. And we've got yet another enemy that is looking at the yawning gulf that's being opened up in our civilization on all of these different fronts, and they're pounding stakes into these fronts. They weren't just trying to get Donald Trump elected in America, as the left wants you to believe, as the Democrats are trying to insist that we focus on by indicting people. And they're indicting people on things that have nothing to do with the 2016 election. They want you to focus on that. They do not want you to focus on the fact that the Democrats actually paid for the research that was used to start the investigation, right? But it doesn't matter, because in all of these cases, Russians they're fighting on both sides. They're putting up social media on both sides. They are encouraging African Americans who care about their families and don't want to see people die, don't want to see their sons and daughters killed by police, trying to whip them into a frenzy on one side, at the same time they are promoting Blue Lives Matter and trying to get white Americans angry at the blacks who are protesting. They're organizing protests on both sides in the same place. That's what they were doing. They are using what the left has done, using what Islam has done against us. And so, let me end with this. Who is breaking Europe? All of these enemies are breaking Europe. It's Hijrah. It is jihadis are breaking Europe. It is leftists, cultural Marxists that are breaking Europe. It is Russians that are breaking Europe. And all of these forces are arrayed against us here too. And here's what I would ask. Don't let them win. Don't let them win. Not in Europe, not here, especially not here, because they are winning. They are defeating us, and we can't let. There are people in this room who are letting InfoWars lie to them. They are reading things from Voice of Europe, which is so compelling, it's like crack. You're reading things from Voice of Europe, and you're retweeting them. You're reading articles from RT, and you're emailing them out. Our enemies are doing this to us. What they're trying to do is get the percentage support for the system below 50%. It's at 51% in America right now. 51% support. And every time you read an InfoWars article, you are increasing the likelihood that you're going to say, you know what, this system, it's not working. The federal government, they're crazy. They crashed planes into our buildings on 9/11. You know what? Those guys are waging an info war, and I don't know who it's on behalf of, but I know it's not on behalf of us. Don't let them